Okay. Calling fire down from heaven. We as Christians, we like to think of ourselves as having a great influence on people around us, whoever. And I was over at the house of a friend of ours the other day, and the lady that was there, she was bragging on how many degrees that she had and whatever in the Bible, you know, I've done this and I've done that type of thing. And you know, I could work on that kind of thing, but I don't want to waste my time in it, because men cannot ordain the callings of God. They can give you a certificate to say that you work in that, but that's all they can do. They can't tell. They can't put on there how much you are dedicated. They can't put on there that, yeah, God leads me in this. And the degree that the degree that men have absolutely nothing to do with the power that you have with God. I want to say that again. I don't care if you have 12 doctrines, okay? If you're 90 years old, you have 12 doctrines. It means absolutely nothing to God, other than you love to study God's Word. That's all that it means. Doesn't mean you have any kind of power with God at all. I want to read to you here some things about the reason that men have called fire down out of heaven, what the purpose of it was, and why it was done, and if we should or not today as a Christian. I'm talking about our personal relationship with God. I'm not talking about what you have going on and that make men admire you for your accomplishments. What we really want to be after is, what can we do to make God admire us for our accomplishments? See, that's the thing that really gives you the ability to call fire down out of heaven. It's nothing that men can do, but what God can do through you, and which has absolutely nothing to do with man whatsoever. It's a personal relationship between you and God. It's what God can do through you that gives you the ability to call fire down from heaven. And we're going to start in Luke 9:50, about 9:51. Actually, the indentation here is 49. We're going to just skip on down to 51. And it came to pass, the Bible said in Luke 9:51, when the time was come that he should go to be received up, that is Jesus, received up into heaven from the cross. He was going down to Jerusalem to sacrifice himself on the cross. He steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans, to make ready for him. And they did not receive him, because his face was set, as though he would go to Jerusalem. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly how all that took place. Maybe there was some conversation, and apparently there was some conversation went on between them and the Lord. And they'd be like, well, if you only want to stay here overnight, then we don't want to deal with you. If you don't want to come to minister, or that type of thing. And there's people like that, you know. And they wouldn't have anything to do with Christ. And because, well, if you know about the city of Samaria, the background, the history of it, it was not out of their nature to do this, because the Samaritans were half Jews. They were Jews that had been kicked out of the church of that day. They were people who were not allowed to participate in the things of the city of Jerusalem, so they moved them over to Samaria. That's who they were. By the law of Moses, they were not Jewish people, but the Samaritans were counted as Gentiles. Okay, so it was not unusual for them to do, but they had been habit all their lives of doing things like this, so it wasn't a strange thing for them to do that. Okay, so anyway, and they did not receive him, because he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And when his disciples James and John saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire come down from heaven and consume them as Elias did, or Elijah? Okay, now before I go into verse 55, let me just go down over to Elijah, 2 Kings here, and we'll take a look at what they were talking about. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 1, down about verse 10, I think. Let's back up just a little bit more. I'm not sure where, but excuse me, it always goes all the way back to 5, really. But let's just start at like 7, so we get a good idea of what exactly they were talking about. That's for those of you folks who don't know a lot about who Elijah was and his thing that he had about calling fire down. He did this more than one time in his life. And the most famous one, of course, was with the prophets of Baal, where it consumed the altar there and the sacrifice and everything. Okay, so verse 7. 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 7. He said to them, what manner of man excuse me, was he which came to meet you and told you these words? And they answered him, and they was inquiring, was it Elijah? You know, because they were after Elijah. They were going to come and get Elijah, force him to come up and to do whatever. Hopefully we'll find out here. Okay. And they said he was a hairy man, and girt with a girdle of leather about his loins. And he said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. Then the king sent him a captain of 50 with his 50. And he went up to him, and behold, he sat on top of a hill, and spake unto him, thou man of God, the king hath said, come down. And Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, if I be a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And there came fire down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. Okay. Now if you read back here a little ways further, you'll find that Elijah was a little bit concerned about these men taking him and what they were going to do with him. You know, so they're coming after Elijah to take him by force, or they wouldn't have showed up with 50 men. You know, if they was just going to ask him to come down, they would have said this and that, but no, they were going to come take him by force. So, and it was kind of obvious to Elijah. And it was kind of obvious to God as well. And God didn't want them to think that they could come up against the God's man of the hour of that day and thinking that they were going to force him into doing anything, because because in that day the prophet was perceived at the most high level of a man of God. Okay, and grace had not been given to the church yet. Christ was not born, and God's anger abided upon the people at that time. So this is why the fire came down, and they instantly got an enactment of what God's anger is all about. Without Christ, this is all that's left, is what you're seeing right here with Elijah and these men. And this happened a couple different times here with Elijah and with 50. I don't know how many men that were burned up here. And I'd like to go about it. I don't have all the time to go through this whole story. Okay, I would like to, but we're not going to do that. So that's enough of that. But this is what was going on with Elijah. This is what they were talking about. Okay. Okay, we go back to Luke chapter 9, 55 here, and this is what the Lord told him. But and he turned, verse 55. Okay, called down the fires. Last verse was consume them, as Elijah, or in the King James says Elias, which is Elijah as well. And and he turned and rebuked them. Jesus did turn and said, "You know not what manner of spirit ye are of. For the Son of Man," who that is, Christ, "the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." And they went into another village. Okay. Now this is what we're going to talk about. Now this almost seems as a contradiction to some things I had said before. Okay, about picking up the whip. There comes a time to pick up the whip, but there's also a time to turn the other cheek. And the reasoning that we see in this is the cause of why everything is happening. If you notice there, Jesus told them that you don't know what manner of spirit that you are, because Jesus, he says, "I have come to save men's lives, not to destroy them." Now, God does everything that he does for the purpose of love. So there was not a era of grace with Elijah. Okay, so what God did to show his love there was destroy the enemy and show God's power and his mercy to his man that he had chosen, because those other men had absolutely nothing to do with God in that day. Okay, and these men of Christ's day did. Christ said it, "I have come to save men's lives, not destroy them." So it was the cause and the purpose at hand is why the Lord says, "Don't call fire down out of heaven." So that brings us to the question, should a Christian ever call fire down out of heaven to destroy people today? That's a question, obviously, you have to ponder about, because there's a lot of different situations that you can get into. I think if the Lord really needed to do something like that, you wouldn't have to call it down. God would be there before you, and you wouldn't even be involved in it, you know, of today. But what if we called just, what if the same situation that came along with Elijah? And I'm getting some hard questions here, because I really want to dig into this thing, because I want to know, what if 50 million came to your door today, and they were gonna come and force you, and you don't know what they're gonna do. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of different things that you can get into, but you know, you'd have to know what men it were, why they were there. Would it be possible to call the cops and to get them to leave? And it's like this: do every possible thing that you can to avoid it. You know what I mean? And what if you, okay, let's just say, what if you had the ability to do that, to call fire down from heaven? Would it be right in the eyes of God? What if you if everything that you did was of non-avail? You know, I mean, you just couldn't do anything, and you were left standing there, not knowing what to do. These 50 men, and they got guns. Those men that day had swords. Put it this way: what if the mafia came to your house and said, the boss wants to see you, we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse? I know I can't do that very well. But what if they came, and you know, and the cops were afraid of them? And you know, I'm kind of painting myself into a corner here, you know, because I want to explore every avenue of not doing this. You know, something. If you could call, I mean, it was at your fingertips, just like this, okay, and you could call it down just any second, anytime you wanted it. Okay, you could call it. Well, number one, if you knew that you could, you wouldn't be afraid. You know, you just wouldn't be afraid of those men, which would throw a monkey wrench into their works. And what if they pulled their guns out and says, "Come on, you're going with me"? You know what I would do? I would bring as much mercy as I could. I'd say, "Fire!" I'd say, "Fire, come down and get this one." And when they saw that one fella burn up, you know, the rest of them would like be gone. I'd say, "Fire, come down and get this one, and while you're at it, get their guns." You know. So, and this is what Christ was after here with these men. He was trying to show these men that you don't know what spirit of man, what kind of a spirit that you're of. You are, Christ is under the mercy of God, you know. I mean, we would think as a sinner, if a sinner was doing it, now, I could go back and get, and I know this is a bit long, I could go back and get some comments of sinners, and they find all kind of stuff wrong here. But I tell you, the principle here is love. You got to show love, and you got to show God's power, who Jesus Christ is. You have to show those things, because otherwise the world will have no respect. Like we're saying, it's almost a contradiction of Christ picking up the whip and running people out of church, and then later on saying, you don't know what manner of spirit that you men are of. But it's not. Christ does everything that he can to save lives. Not just to save lives, but to save souls. You know, because even if you had to take that place of that one, if you had to take the one, then that could be a soul that's lost forever. And you could think about, and this is what Christ was doing. Listen, people, you have to think about what it's going to take to save a man's life before you start calling fire down from heaven and consuming people. I mean, there's people that walk every church they walk into. Okay, Lord, let's just get them going here. Let's just consume that one over there first because I think he's ugly, and then this one over here because too fat. That way we can make sure that both sides of the church have got their attention. You know what I mean? You know, they would be, people do that kind of stuff if they had the power to do it. And all that Christ wants us to do is to be serious enough about showing God's love in a way that God will that He will move among His people, and people will take Him serious. Once again, there's too many fake people out there, too many fake Christians. All right, God bless. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next time. Another good message right here across in the Middle Ministry.